What if I told you that astrology was colonized too? Now, I'm not a historian. I haven't studied this in a classroom because they don't teach you this, frankly. But over 20 years, I started connecting the dots that I just couldn't ignore in my own natal chart, in placements I was taught to be ashamed of, in the stories of my own family that we never talked about. And once I saw these patterns, I could not see it. So today, I want to walk you through what I've pieced together and the 8 ways I've come to decolonize how I practice and teach astrology. I'm Lizzie Tagorda, a business astrologer and creator of the Astro Brand Method, blending more than 20 years of brand strategy with the precision of astrology to help entrepreneurs and underrepresented leaders make their mark. If you love all things astrology and internalized liberation, hit subscribe. I'm doing more of this kind of exploration right here. Growing up in Hawaii, my Ilocano grandmother never spoke to me in our language. I used to think that it was just her choice. However, it wasn't. This is what I later learned was colonial mentality. Back in 2019, I was so honored to meet Asha Frost, Indigenous medicine woman. Not only did Asha and I become really steadfast friends, we also went on a book writing journey together. Asha has written over 2 best-selling books. She's written all of these wonderful decks, and she has taught me so much growing up as a First Nations person in Canada. And she's taught me a lot about what it means to have colonial mentality. Now, I heard this term from her first back in 2019, and colonial mentality is basically the internalized oppression that and belief system that the dominant culture is superior. So, for any of us who've grown up in places that have been colonized, and that's most of us, whether you are of the colonized culture or the dominant culture, we are breathing and living this idea of colonial mentality that the dominant minority culture is better, like in all aspects, is smarter, is more affluent, has more power, is more beautiful, all of these things where we put them up on a pedestal. And for those of us in the colonized culture, we look up to them. And so this happened to me growing up in Hawaii. Like I said, my paternal grandmother, who was Ilocano, that's Ilocano are part of the Philippines, I guess you would call them a tribe in the Philippines. And when my grandmother moved to Hawaii as a teenager, she came to follow a lot of other Ilocanos and Filipinos to work on the plantations. In Hawaii, in the early 1900s, late 1800s, there was this huge plantation economy where there weren't enough workers because, as you know, when you colonize someplace, you can't get the indigenous people to work on these on your plantation. So, like the native Hawaiians were not allowed to work on the plantations. So they imported people from Japan, China, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Portugal, Korea, and all of these people came to live in Hawaii. But what the colonizers always do, aka the plantation owners, aka the capitalists, aka the people that stole Hawaii, the British and the American business people that literally stole Hawaii from the Hawaiian nation, the monarchy, they knew that to keep people, keep the plantation workers from uprising, that they would have to separate them, to segregate them. So there was all of these different plantation villages that were based on where you came from. And not only were they based on where they came from, they were ranked. And so the Filipinos and the Ilocanos happened to come last out of all of the people that came, and they happened to be darker skinned, and they happened to be paid less than the different cultures on the plantation to keep everybody separated. And so when you're growing up, when my grandmother came to Hawaii, she wanted to assimilate as soon as possible. She wanted to keep her skin fairer. She wanted to dress in what everybody else was dressing. And she was like this amazing seamstress, and she would sew all of these beautiful dresses for herself. And when she had her children and her grandchildren, she refused to teach us the language because she did not want us to have an accent. And so growing up in Hawaii, I was actually really, when I was younger, I was super ashamed of being Filipino. I rarely told people that I was Filipino. I had a Japanese stepdad who sent me to Japanese school. So ironically, I learned Japanese instead of Ilocano. And I got educated. I excelled in classical music, and I did all the things to be connected to what I thought was the superior culture, the culture of being haole, the culture of being white, that was educated, that was, played the classical clarinet, all of these things. Little did I know that I was suffering from colonial mentality. I kid you not. It was not until I met Asher Frost that I learned about colonial mentality, and my mind was blown. I was like, oh my gosh, I am doing all these things. I'm suffering from colorism. I'm suffering from this idea that the Filipinos were not good enough. I'm suffering from this idea that my culture was not good enough. All of these different things. But I'm saying this because if colonization separates us from, of course, our land. And in Hawaii, there's a huge sovereign nation movement, anti-colonial movement to give the land back to the Hawaiian people. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the colonial mentality, the internalized oppression that separates us from loving our culture, from loving our identity. And so if colonization separates us from our land, our culture, our values, and our identity, then decolonization for me is about reconnecting all of these things. And of course, in astrology, I have noticed so many different patterns where we are separated from ourselves. And so in my books and in my practice of astrology, I am aiming to reconnect them into this greater cosmology. And so, if you have anything in your natal chart, especially if you've been reading a lot of traditional astrology, I'm not knocking traditional astrology. There's definitely uses for traditional astrology. But when you're looking at your own natal chart, like my natal chart, I have an Aquarius sun. So, Aquarius sitting opposite of Leo, the sun, sun, it rules Leo. So, Aquarius is in detriment. I have my Pisces Mercury. And so, Pisces sits across from Virgo, where Mercury makes its home. So my Pisces Mercury, which happens to be my Gemini rising chart ruler, is also not only in detriment and fall. I have my Mars and Taurus, another planet that has been deemed bad. When I was first like diving into astrology, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many bad things about my chart. Just like I thought my Ilocano heritage wasn't good enough. And so today in this series, we're going to be looking at just how astrology was colonized and how my upcoming book, Astrology for Changemakers, aims to decolonize our astrological thinking so that we can create wholeness within ourselves again. Now, this is actually a piece of what I dig into in my book, Astrology for Changemakers. So if any of this is landing for you, I'll drop the link in the description so that you can go deeper. So I was born and raised in Hawaii. And growing up in Hawaii, I watched people fight to get their own land back. That fight, that ongoing fight that has been hundreds of years, has taught me more about colonization than any history book ever could, because who is writing those history books? Now, there's definitely a sovereignty movement that I'm not an expert in, but I wanted to introduce a Native Hawaiian scholar, poet, and leader that was that was a leader of the Hawaiian sovereignty movement, Haunani K. Trask. She has a few books. I've read her books and her plight to restore sovereignty to the native Hawaiian nation. Now, she says resistance is its own reward. Now, colonization hasn't ever ended. Hawaii, for all of its beauty and its magic, the way that it is organized right now, it's really a militarized zone. The island of Oahu has all of the military bases from all of the branches of military, and it's such a strategic piece of land in the middle of the Pacific. While I really would love for the Hawaiian nation to have more rights over their land, more rights over being able to steward the land. I wish, I totally wish I could see the United States giving this land back. Unfortunately, I can't see that ever happening, although I would like for it to happen. Now, colonization is not over. Okay, this land grab. Now, if you remember the fires in 2023 in Lahaina that burned down almost in the entire city of Lahaina on Maui, that absolutely was due to the effects of current day colonization that started in the plantation era. Now, you have to imagine that the native Hawaiians, before colonization, before first contact, the land, the Aina, was supporting tens, not if not hundreds of thousands of people. The native Hawaiians knew how to divide land equitably so that everybody would get a piece from the mountain to the ocean, so that everybody would have fresh water. They would have food product from the mountains. They would have places to plant their taro. They would have fish ponds that would benefit the entire community. And they were master stewards, being able to live off the land, to have the land produce more than enough food. Yet, when the colonizers came, when they started to do all of the land grabs and build plantations, for during the U.S. Civil War, because we couldn't get any sugar from the South, so Hawaii and California were the main producers of sugar. Everybody that came through Hawaii would see, oh, there's sandalwood forests. Let's, decimate the forest. Oh, there's all of this fertile land. Let's just decimate this land and plant a monoculture of pineapple, a monoculture of sugarcane, whatever it did. But the stewards, these were not stewards. The plantation owners, the colonizers, were not stewards of the land. They were extractors of the land. And because of the plantation era water diversions in Lahaina, this dried up all of the town's wetlands. And after the plantations closed, the plantations started closing in the 80s. And I believe that the last plantation that was working in Maui closed in the 90s. I don't have the details for that. I just remember growing up and like seeing all these plantations close. But after the last sugar plantation closed, what did the sugar plantation owners do with the land? Did they restore the land? Did they give the land back to the native Hawaiian people to be able to steward the land? No, they didn't do that. They let the land, they just left it. They let weeds grow, they let invasive grasses grow, and all of this, no water, no wetlands, invasive grasses that were highly flammable, led to this explosive fire. Now, also at this time, over 75% of Lahaina's water was privately controlled. And guess where all of this fresh water was going? It wasn't flowing into the Aina for the public to use. It was flowing into all of these luxury mansions and luxury resorts, filling up pools, watering grass for golf courses and everything like that. And, we're 3 years later and Lahaina is barely being built back. And so when we think about what's happening with Lahaina, this is not anything new. Colonization that started way back in the 1400s, where Western Europeans were discovering lands that were already populated, would see the land as resources, would see the people also as resources that they could extract from, that they could steal from, and that they could claim as their own because they discovered that. And It's still happening now. Now, as a person of color, born and raised in the nation of Hawaii, I am not Native Hawaiian, but according to the rules of the nation of Hawaii at the time, I am a person of the nation of Hawaii. I've been priced out of living permanently in the islands. I'm here in the islands right now, and so this is very hits home for me. But like myself, like a lot of my family members, like so many people in the Hawaiian diaspora, we now live up and down the West Coast. We live in Utah. We live in Las Vegas. I live in San Francisco. And so this really hits home that we cannot even live in the islands that we grew up in. So, what does this have to do with astrology? Now, in the 1600s, astronomer and astrologer Johannes Kepler was both astrologer and astronomer. There was no separation. He was casting intricate horoscopes for emperors, as well as calculating the mathematical laws of planetary motion. Not only that, but he was a musician and he would find music and meaning in the cosmos. At this time, so many astronomers and astrologers were doing the same thing. Universities at the time taught astrology that was integral to both science and medicine. Science and meaning were so interconnected. And Kepler didn't know it yet, but his world was about to be colonized, to be separated, to be categorized, as well as weaponized. Now, Kepler lived from 1571 to 1630, and he was the court mathematician to Emperor Rudolph II. He cast horoscopes for Emperor Augustus and Muhammad, an astrologer, astronomer. It was his same job. But before him, we had Galileo Galilei, who lived from 1564 to 1642, was the court astrologer to the whole Medici family, the Italian family that were patrons of the arts. And not only was he the court astrologer, but Galileo would improve the telescope. He discovered Jupiter's four largest moons, and he defended that idea that the Earth orbits the sun instead of the opposite way around. And the thing with both of these, and just a number of court astrologers who were also astronomers, for them, they were one and the same. The astrology part, adding meaning, adding understanding, adding story, adding narrative to the science part, the astronomy, the ability to see further, to understand our cosmos. Now, in the native Hawaiian culture, we had cosmologists, we had navigators who were integrating and weaving together mythologies that are based in science. When first contact people first came, they would take these different stories as simply as myth, not understanding that in their stories was actual science, that the navigators that proved with the Hokulea that proved that navigators could actually traverse the entire Pacific Ocean, reading the signs of, yes, the stars, but also the tides, the waves, the clouds, the birds, the animals. They could read beyond what people would just say, oh, look, there's a bird flying. They knew where that bird was flying. They knew if it was a land bird, how far it would be away from, the coast, and they would be able to follow it to get to their next location, traversing the entire Pacific Ring. And in these myths that they used to pass on this information, there was no paper, there were no writing implementation tools. Everything would disintegrate before you could pass them on to the next generation. So instead, they passed them on through their mo'olelo, their stories. And these stories, people had this giant wealth of information that they would memorize to pass on these stories from generation to generation. And so while the native Hawaiian people, and that's my perspective, that's where I come from, that's where I know the most from, other cultures were doing this too, to think of it as cosmology, just like Johannes Kepler and Galileo Galilei were combining both science and meaning. From the Western perspective, when astrology was still being used with astronomy, this was from about 1470 to 1640s. This was right before what I am calling the Great Separation. This is something that I've noticed, not particularly written in the history books, but this is my synthesis and framework that I'm seeing in terms of what happened when we started to separate astrology from astronomy. And I'm calling this the Great Separation. So, exactly what happened to separate astrology from astronomy, to demonize and push down astrology, and to raise up astronomy? Now, my theory, astrology got pushed out because it was bad for business. The things that I've been thinking about over the last 20 years comes down to capitalism, power, resources, and the means to control. Now, between the 16th and 18th century, there were some big systemic changes happening in Western society in Europe. Number one, the Reformation, the religious Reformation that started in 1517, was fracturing religious authority in order to consolidate institutional wealth. Now, I don't have any bad feelings about spirituality and religion, but to me, from my perspective of growing up around religious institutions, so much religion is based around controlling people. To say that, hey, if you want to access God, you have to speak through me. And so, of course, this religious growth from the Reformation that separated Catholicism from Protestants, and most of the Protestants were then in England and where else was it? I think Denmark. These were the colonists that then moved to the New World, to the Americas. And at the same time, we started to have the discovery and the discovery movement, where all of these Western nations were looking to discover new lands in order to colonize them, to extract wealth. And then we also had the scientific revolution that happened between 1543 and 1687. During the scientific revolution, we had this to help the discovery, to help chart new routes to the west, to the east, building new tools, building new navigational tools, building new maps and routes, and building new shipping technology to ship resources back and forth from the new worlds to the old world. And so these three things, the religious reformation, the scientific revolution, and the discovery movement of traveling to distant lands to acquire new resources, was happening at the same time. And to me, these three systems were funding early capitalism and empires. And empires needed new systems to justify themselves. The religious Reformation wanted institutional wealth, which led to the discovery, in air quotes here, because people were already living there, of new lands to extract and exploit, which led to the scientific revolution to increase shipping with new maps, new technology, and new routes. And early capitalism is born to fund these global empires and to conquer new horizons. Colonizers needed this new kind of system. And this system births the colonial mindset. Now, these colonizers, these people who were out discovering new lands, forced a brutal separation where indigenous people, the people that were already living in these discovered lands, became commodities to exploit or to simply erase. Astrology itself became superstition to demonize, just myths, and land became a resource to steal, extract from, and sell. And to justify this colonization, the dominant culture cultivated a devastating lie that the technical, the dominant minority, and the commodity held all the value. Okay. Again, the technical who had the more more guns, steel, and germs, guns, and steel. The dominant minority, meaning the very few that were coming in on these ships and dominating and oppressing the people that were already there. And the commodity, the sandalwood from the Hawaiian forests, the fertile lands, the gold and silver from the Philippines and from Central America, from North America. All of these commodities, whoever held the commodity held all that value, which then separated us from meaning, relationship, and connection. So, how does astrology fit in here? Because when you look at astrology, astrology at that time was bad for business. When you look at astrology through the lens of capitalism and greed, the separation of astrology makes perfect sense because astrology once explained the world as a web of sacred relationships, meaning, and cosmic timing. For religion, when you had astrology, you could access spirituality and God by yourself. So religion was like, nope, let's get rid of astrology. So you had to access God only through the church. For science, without astrology, you could separate and categorize and compartmentalize without any spiritual meaning. And of course, for the greed of capitalism, without astrology, you could commodify, exploit, and extract. Now, by lifting the science of astronomy, which of course built the navigational tools for cargo ships, and we know that all the different types of cargo that these ships were carrying, and then lowering astrology, which focused on spiritual interconnectedness, this early capitalism successfully stripped the soul from everything to pad its ledger with higher profits. But separating science from meaning, again, I want to remind you, was uniquely a Western invention. Remember the Polynesian wayfinders and navigators? They were master cosmologists. They wove precise science and ancestral story together. They read the stars, the currents, and the clouds to navigate entire oceans. And they lived in deep relationship with nature, working with divine timing. And so, what would it mean when we would start to bring these things back together? Astrology and astronomy, meaning and science. Everything I just walked through with you is why I wrote my book, Astrology for Changemakers, because I needed somewhere to put all of this together. Astrology for Changemakers is available for pre-order now. The link's in the description. So, what the colonizers tried to erase is still in the marrow of your bones. Now it's time to reclaim it. And this is why, when I look at my book, Astrology for Changemakers, I look at the 8 ways that my perspective of astrology hopes to decolonize your astrological thinking. Now, Astrology for Changemakers, I've seen comments in my Instagram posts. Astrology for Changemakers, yes, is still Western astrology because we are products of this Western world. But my aim is to use 8 different ways to be able to reconnect. Again, if colonization separates us from our culture, our identity, our values, and our land, the process of decolonization aims to reconnect us. So my 8 ways are astrology as cosmology, not a belief system, right? You've heard, do you believe in astrology? Astrology isn't a belief system. Way before Western thinking separated science from meaning, and astronomy from astrology, again, the Polynesian wayfinders were using cosmology, just like other indigenous peoples, weaving science and story together, reading the stars, the currents, the clouds with precision, and passing that wisdom down through story. They were able to navigate the entire Pacific. Inside Astrology for Changemakers, I share this polycultural viewpoints that never separated science from meaning and look at ecosystems and how we each have a necessary part to contribute into the whole. Again, using Western astrology versus Chinese astrology versus Yotish astrology, all of these systems are wonderful, but I'm writing from the viewpoint of Western astrology. After all, Western astrology has its roots in ancient Egypt. The second way I aim to decolonize astrology is astrology as binary, not black and white, not good or bad. Who said Mars is a bad planet? Who said that Aquarius was in detriment? Why do we have to split the zodiac into masculine and feminine? Binary labels are not big enough to hold our parts. We need Mars's conflict and sacred rage. We need yin and yang fluid across every gender. Inside Astrology for Changemakers, I reframe the binaries of good and bad and expand them into duality beyond gender. Now, this is an unfortunate part of my book, and this happens with all books. And ultimately, I missed a huge, big category in editing and still use the definition of binary, giving the two binaries as yin and yang. In the next edition, it will be corrected as duality. I literally caught it on like the last day of edits, and I was like, oh no, what happened? But in the next edition, it will be corrected as duality. We hold both. The third way that I aim to decolonize astrology is astrology as reclamation. We were never erased. Now, for all the cultures through colonization and diaspora, many of us have been cut off not only from our land, but from our culture, from our identity, from our different teachings and wisdom. Yet, some of this was never lost. It's literally still in your bones, especially if you have strong Capricorn placements. You are a wisdom and tradition keeper, waiting for you to remember it through the dreams of your ancestors. I have so many different customers and clients and friends who have told me that they have remembered and reclaimed lost wisdom that was literally transferred to them in dreams. This isn't made up. I truly believe that they are able to reclaim their wisdom that was once cut off, yet not erased. In my book, Astrology for Changemakers, I make a point that your lived experience, all the things that you've overcome, like me overcoming colonial mentality, identity, and culture, are needed and valued. That you don't have to look outside for your leadership. It already lives in you, waiting to be reclaimed and remembered. The fourth way I hope to decolonize astrology is astrology as relationship, meaning that connection, that bond, that bridge building, not separation. Now, your natal chart was never just about you. Opposite your rising sign, which we think of our big three, sun, moon, and rising, sits your descendant, which I call your big four, the fourth part of your big four. And your descendant represents the people with whom you're here to lead, to serve, to co create with. Leadership doesn't happen alone. You can't lead alone. You need your people. So, like the cosmos, everything in your chart is connected. Inside Astrology of Changemakers, when you look at your leadership framework that I use in this book, you look at you and your people. Leadership is relational, so you need your people. You're not separate. The fifth way that I hope to decolonize astrology is astrology as ancestral, not as commodity. Pride in your culture, pride in my culture, it was literally shamed out of us, along with our right to rest, to play, to feel joy, to be embodied, to feel pleasure, to hold power. Rest is not laziness. Play is not a waste of time. Joy is a birthright. These are our ancestral rights that we are reclaiming and more valuable than commodities and profits. Inside my book, Astrology for Changemakers, I aim to remind you that your lived experience, your culture, your identity, your values that you take with you wherever you go is what makes you so irreplaceable, so one of a kind. You simply have to remember your wisdom in your bones. The sixth way that I hope to decolonize astrology and astrological thinking is astrology as systemic, not a personal failing. Now, you likely were taught that a leader looks a certain way. Maybe your view of a leader is male, white, wealthy, domineering. And if you didn't fit that template, of course, you never saw yourself as a leader. And this isn't your fault. Capitalism, patriarchy, supremacy, colonialism, they need you to believe that you're not enough. Just as you are more than enough. So we're changing the system. Inside Astrology for Changemakers, I want you to liberate yourself from so many systemic beliefs that you may have internalized, and so that you can see yourself as a leader just as you are. When we can't when we can't see ourselves as leaders, we may also have a hard time seeing our own value. And of course, this is by design. Yet you can absolutely reclaim your power as personal liberation. The seventh way I aim to decolonize astrology is astrology as resistance, not shame. You were likely told that you were too much and not enough at the same time, too sensitive, too much of this, not enough of that. Oh my gosh, have I heard the stories? Astrology hands you your pride back. You are the exact design you were born to be. Reclaiming that on purpose with love of self is resistance. In Astrology of Changemakers, I hope to allow you to reframe what you might have judged as a liability to transmute them into assets. Your challenges, your journey, your perspective is such a gift. And if you have shame around them, you might simply need a reframe and a gentle witness to turn them into gold. And lastly, the eighth way that I aim to decolonize astrological thinking is to see astrology as reconnection. Similar to number four, astrology as relationship, astrology as reconnection allows us to connect and make whole all of our compartmentalized parts. Long before first contact and colonization, Polynesian wayfinders moved across the Pacific through relationship to Mother Earth, Mother Nature, relationship to the ancestors, to the stars, to the earth, to each other. Astrology asks us to return to that relationship, not only to remember, but to practice, walk it, embody it, live it. Everything and everyone was always connected, always needed and necessary together. Inside my book, Astrology for Changemakers, I aim to connect all your compartmentalized parts to see that they work together, that you are whole, that you are interconnected, that you are part of this great universal cosmology. The oppressive systems want to divide and conquer. Today, going forward, survival is of the most collaborative. So we are going to connect and co-create together. Now, what the colonizers tried to erase is still in your marrow. It's time to reclaim it. If you want to keep exploring all things astrology, leadership, and internalized liberation with me, of course, subscribe now. So it turns out that my natal chart was beautiful all along. My Aquarius sun, my Mercury in Pisces, my Mars in Taurus. It was the deconditioning and the decolonizing work that needed to change within me and to create that internal liberation. That's exactly what I get into in my book, Astrology for Changemakers. So you too can reframe and reclaim your star powers and be the leader you were born to be. So be sure to pre-order my book, Astrology for Changemakers. It comes out on September 8th with Wiser Books. The pre-order links in the description below. So thank you again. If this episode, if this podcast has touched your heart, please share it with others. Please leave me a rating and review so we can reach the hearts of even more changemakers like you.